So what we can see from this analysis is that, in fact, mean average precision has very little to do with user interests. Although it can be given a user-oriented interpretation, this interpretation is rather strange. And so we should call it a more system-oriented measure. And what we should do is to give more focus on user-oriented measures. So for that, we should specify user standpoints or tasks for which we want to perform measurements. And then after defining this user standpoint, we should use the corresponding measure. Also, I think we should put more focus on distinguishing between high precision and high recall methods. For example, on the web, it's quite standard that people focus on high precision methods, but there are also many applications, like, for example, pattern retrieval, where high recall is very important. And instead of regarding one single measure, mean average precision, we should try to develop a diversity of methods where depending on the type of application, we can say, okay, this is a high precision application, we use method A, and if you need high recall, you should rather use method B, instead of following the approach one size fits all. Okay, so much about measures. Now, once you have your measurement values, the question is this the improvement that you might have observed really significant, or is it even substantial? Well, now significance test, it's fairly standard now. Well, the first tests that were widely used were Wilcoxon tests some years ago. Sanderson and Sobel claimed that t-test also would be appropriate to use, and recently there have been some arguments that randomization tests also would be appropriate. But the point is that significance tests just tell you that there is a difference, and this difference may be very tiny, but depending on the size of your collection, even if you get only an improvement of 0.5% or so, if your test collection is big enough, you still might get a significant difference. But does this, is this really what we are looking for? Instead, what we are looking for is substantial improvements, and in fact, Carnsbach-Jones already in 1974 proclaimed that, well, performance differences less than 5% should be disregarded. It just doesn't matter. 5 to 10% are noticeable, and more than 10% are material. So what we are interested in the end are really substantial or material improvements, and not the tiny little bits, irrespective of whether they are significant or not. What matters is the size of improvement. We want substantial improvements, and all the tiny improvements, there has been way too much emphasis on this. Well, in the end, of course, the question is, what is this really of benefit to the user? And, well, there have been not that many studies, but common to all these studies is that first, users are able to compensate for differences in retrieval quality. So difference, at least to a limited amount, retrieval quality is not such a big issue, because users are able to quickly identify the relevant documents as long as there are some in the result. So the quality difference is not that important for the end user. But on the other hand, users are able to notice quality differences. So given two systems side by side, they will very soon identify the better system and of course prefer to use the better system. Well, now, of course, the question is, to what extent do these systems really help the user, and does better retrieval quality help the user in fulfilling his task in a better way? And in fact, there is no clear picture on this issue. There are only a few studies, and it's quite unclear to what extent retrieval quality really improves users' task success rate. So far, unfortunately, we do not know if a better retrieval system really helps the user in any better way solving her or his task. Also, in terms of user satisfaction, there's no clear picture if users are more satisfied with a better retrieval system. So this is still an area where we need more research. So all the emphasis on better retrieval quality of the backend has not really gone through to users performing their tasks in a better way and users being more satisfied. We need more research in this area. Of course, well, so far we only have followed a very system-oriented approach, with the exception of the last slide. Now, since some years, there is some discussion about the introducing context. There are two conferences dealing with context in information retrieval. And here I'm using a slide that Karl Javelin presented last year at the Dachstuhl workshop, describing the current situation. So here we have the traditional Cranfield point of view. Well, from the wider point of view, we have a user working in a context trying to solve some task, but the system-oriented studies, instead, they live in a cave, what Karl called the Cranfield cave. So they do not consider the user at all. Instead, we are dealing with documents and search requests, which are represented in some way. Then there is some matching. We get a query result. And all we have from the user is relevance assessments, which creates us a recall base. And then we perform an evaluation by comparing the query result to the recall base, and we get some evaluation results. So the only way the user has some influence is by means of giving some, specifying beforehand some search requests and the corresponding relevance assessments, but the context the actual user is living in or the interaction is not really taken into account. This is more a batch-oriented design, and so Karl calls it the cave, that all this work is performed in the cave and not considering the outside world where our actual users are. So he compares this to this kind of sports, where the classic approach corresponds to optimizing fuel and engine and the engine, but for the end user, the question, for example, which one is better for going shopping would be the more important one, but there's hardly any research in this direction. So now what should be done instead, according to Karl, is that we try to put more focus on the human task, see what, so focus on the user, so what she or he is going to do, and then when the user is using a system, try to evaluate the task outcome, and this gives us the evaluation result. So we want to know to what extent does the system really help in performing better, help the user in performing better with respect to the task he or she faces. That should be the focus. And Karl also did some studies on end-user behavior, so more professional users who are searching every day, and he noticed that users who use unorthodox queries and sessions, So usually they use very short queries and then combine these queries. So the overall strategy employed by the searchers is that they try to optimize the entire information seeking process. So whereas the classic system-oriented approach follows the idea of a single shot, in fact, these users try to optimize the outcome of the whole process. So it's not the answer to, they are not trying to develop the one optimum query and then submit it to the system. Instead, they want to optimize the overall outcome of the search process. And so he claims this as a rationalist versus incrementalist strategy. So in system-oriented approaches assume a rationalist strategy where the user formulates the optimum query, but instead users usually follow an incrementalist strategy, collecting relevant documents over time. And so there is the challenge that IR systems must support the whole process, and the current focus on single queries is not very helpful for the end users. A recent formal evaluation by van der Bouwheide also confirms this finding. They presented this as a paper at the IRF symposium earlier this year. And they did a study and they asked pattern searchers which features of IR systems are relevant for them. And then they compared the features named by pattern searchers to the features provided by some popular open source IR systems. And of course, there was one slide with the standard features, which I'm not showing here. But here I have the features that belong to session support. And as we can see, none of these features relevant for session support actually is supported by any of these systems. So these systems still follow the wrong ideal of a single shot approach, but in fact, at least these professional searchers, they are asking for session support, which is not provided at all by this system. But we should not only blame these systems. If you look at most web search engines, for example, you can also say that there really isn't any session support at all. They just help you in improving the previous query, but there is no support for the whole search session. This might be okay for more than 90% of the web searches, but for the remaining 5 or 10%, whenever you have a difficult query, then you are missing this session support in the web search engines. In fact, there are some systems that try to provide advanced session support. We have been working on the Daffodil system for almost 10 years now. It's a front end for digital libraries, and besides other things, it tries to support the whole session. So most of the features listed on the previous slide are implemented in Daffodil. And what's also very important is that Daffodil provides a number of different tools for pushing the search forward. Like, for example, the system suggests related terms, or it provides different ways of browsing tables of contents of journals and conference proceedings, and also shows you author networks, and also there are means for analyzing the current search result. Now, of course, this is a rather complex search system. Now,